New Year's Eve was supposed to smell like hope. That's what people say, at least. Fresh beginnings, clean slates. Another chance to believe life might finally be kind. I believed that once too. I ironed my best cardigan that evening, the soft gray one my late husband bought me years ago. I even wore a string of pearls, even though my hands trembled while fastening the clasp. I wanted to look useful. The house buzzed with voices, laughter spilling from the living room like a language I no longer spoke. My son's house, their house now, was dressed for celebration. Gold streamers, flickering lights, a giant digital clock on the wall counting down the minutes to midnight. I stood in the doorway, invisible. My daughter-in-law barely glanced at me when I entered. She was beautiful in a sharp, effortless way, perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect control. Everything about her screamed efficiency, success, youth, the kind of woman the world listens to, the kind of woman who decides when something, or someone, has outlived their usefulness. "Mom, sit," my son said quickly, gesturing toward a corner chair. He didn't look me in the eye, he never did anymore. I sat. Plates clinked, glasses filled. Music played softly in the background, something upbeat and cheerful, completely disconnected from the tight, knot forming in my chest. I tried to follow the conversation, but the words slipped past me like water through cracked hands. I smiled anyway, because that's what I've learned to do. At 11:58 p.m., my daughter-in-law stood up and tapped her glass with a spoon. "I just want to say something before the new year begins," she said brightly. Everyone turned toward her. My heart sank. She smiled wider, the kind of smile that looks warm from a distance but feels sharp up close. "This year has been challenging for all of us, and going into the new year, we need to make some practical decisions." Practical. That word landed heavy. She finally looked at me then. Really looked. Like someone assessing old furniture, deciding whether to keep it or throw it away. "We're putting you in a nursing home," she said. The room went silent. "You're too old to be useful now." The words didn't echo, they didn't need to. They sliced cleanly, efficiently, just like she intended. I felt my breath leave my body. Someone laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. "It wasn't. I mean," she continued, unfazed, "you don't cook anymore, you forget things. You can't help with the house. And honestly, it's becoming a burden. We've done our part." I turned to my son. He stared at the floor. That hurt more than her words. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to remind them of who I had been, of everything I had done, but my voice refused to come out, tangled somewhere between disbelief and humiliation. The clock on the wall beeped. 12 a.m. Happy New Year. Everyone cheered. I sat there smiling weakly while my world cracked open. They toasted to fresh starts while discarding me like an expired calendar. Later that night, I lay awake in the small guest room that used to be mine. The walls felt closer than before. The house creaked unfamiliar sounds, as if it too was warning me that I no longer belonged. Useless. The word replayed in my mind, over and over. I stared at my hands, wrinkled, spotted, tired, hands that once stitched torn clothes late into the night, hands that held my son through fevers, heartbreaks, failures, hands that buried my husband with dignity when no one else was strong enough to stand. Useless. They didn't know. They had no idea who I was before time bent my back and slowed my steps. They didn't know what I still carried inside me. The next morning, my daughter-in-law slid a brochure across the kitchen table. Glossy, smiling elderly faces, sunlit hallways. "Look," she said casually, sipping her coffee. "This place is nice, very clean, you'll be taken care of." Taken care of. Like an object. I picked up the brochure with steady hands. She noticed, her eyebrow twitched slightly, surprised. Maybe that I wasn't shaking. "When would you like me gone?" I asked softly. She hesitated, just for a second. Then soon, the sooner the better. My son remained silent. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Clarity. I nodded and folded the brochure carefully. "All right." She relaxed instantly. Victory suited her. What she didn't see was the decision forming behind my calm eyes. They thought I was finished. They thought age had erased me. They thought usefulness had an expiration date. They were wrong. Very wrong. Because before I became old, before I became quiet, before I became invisible, I had built things. I had survived things. I had learned lessons no school teaches and strength no mirror reflects. And if this new year was about fresh starts, then mine would be nothing like they expected. That night, while the house slept, I opened a box hidden beneath my bed. Inside were documents, letters, and a worn leather notebook, records of a life I never talked about, a life that still had power. I traced my fingers over the pages and whispered to myself, "You should never have called me useless." Outside, fireworks exploded in the distance, and for the first time in years, I smiled, not out of politeness but purpose. The nursing home didn't smell like medicine. It smelled like surrender. Lavender air freshener tried and failed to hide the deeper scent of time. Old paper, tired bodies, forgotten promises. The building stood tall and clean, just like the brochure promised, but something about it felt hollow, like a place designed not for living, but for waiting, waiting to be forgotten. My daughter-in-law walked ahead of me, heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She carried my small suitcase like it weighed nothing. I carried nothing but myself. At the reception desk, a young woman smiled too brightly. "Welcome, you must be Mrs. H. She's here for long-term care." My daughter-in-law cut in. "Room 214, all paperwork's done. Long-term." I watched my name reduced to a file. My life summarized in checkboxes. Age, blood pressure, dietary needs. No space for history, no space for truth. My son stood behind her, hands in his pockets. He looked uncomfortable, like a guest at his own mother's funeral. "Mom," he said quietly, "this is for the best." I nodded, again, because arguing would have given them guilt, and guilt would have softened them. I didn't want soft. I wanted sharp. Room 214 was small but spotless. A single bed, a window overlooking the parking lot, a dresser that smelled faintly of disinfectant. On the wall hung a generic painting of a lake, calm, fake, empty. "This is it," my daughter-in-law said. Setting down the suitcase, she looked around, satisfied. "See, nice." She hugged my son, kissed his cheek, and turned to leave. No hug for me. No goodbye. Just a final glance, quick, relieved, before the door closed behind them. The click of the lock echoed, louder than it should have. I was alone. For a moment, I let myself feel it. The weight, the quiet, the truth of what they had done. They hadn't brought me here to be cared for. They brought me here to disappear politely. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the window. Cars came and went. Families arrived and left. Life moved on, uncaring and fast. I whispered to myself, "Not yet." That first week, I observed. People think old age makes you blind. It doesn't. It sharpens you in different ways. You stop wasting energy on noise. And suddenly, patterns become clear. I learned the rhythm of the place. Morning meds at 7 o'clock, breakfast at 8 o'clock, physical therapy at 10 o'clock, lunch at noon, silence in the afternoons, broken only by television murmurs and the occasional cough. I learned faces. Mrs. Donnelly in room 208, sharp mind trapped in a failing body. Mr. Klein, who pretended not to hear so people wouldn't talk to him. And then there was Nurse Evelyn. She noticed me noticing. "You're very quiet," she said one afternoon, checking my vitals. "I've already said most of what mattered," I replied. She smiled softly. "You don't seem like the type who's finished." I met her eyes. "Neither do you." That earned me a pause, then a nod. Evelyn became my first opening. Over tea in the common room, she told me things, small things, about staff shortages, budget cuts, management problems. I listened more than I spoke, filing everything away. Information is a currency most people underestimate. At night, when the halls went still, I opened my leather notebook. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded but legible. Names, dates, decisions. I had kept records my entire life, not out of paranoia, but habit. My late husband used to tease me about it. History forgets, I used to tell him. Paper doesn't. Inside that notebook were details of investments made decades ago, properties purchased quietly, accounts established under trusts, money my son didn't know existed, money my daughter-in-law had never counted. I smiled in the dark. They thought my usefulness ended with my ability to cook dinner. They never asked how the house they lived in was paid for. The second week, I requested access to the computer room. The administrator hesitated. "We usually limit." I taught accounting for 30 years. I said calmly, "I won't break your machine." She laughed awkwardly and handed me a time slot. That computer hummed like an old friend. Slowly, carefully, I began reconnecting threads of a life I had allowed to go quiet. Old contacts, former students, colleagues who now sat on boards, ran firms, signed checks. Most were surprised to hear from me. None ignored me. "Mrs. H, we thought you retired." "I did," I said, "not disappeared." Each conversation restored something inside me. Not pride, not ego. Presence. The third week, my daughter-in-law called. "Are you settling in?" she asked, her tone falsely sweet. Very much, I replied. Good, because we're thinking of selling some assets this year. Downsizing, planning for the future. There it was. I see, I said. She waited, expecting advice, permission, blessing. I gave her none. That silence unsettled her. Well, she said quickly, just letting you know. After the call ended, I laughed quietly to myself. They were already counting money that wasn't theirs. What she didn't know was that several key assets were still legally tied to me, protected by clauses she'd never bothered to read. Clauses written by a woman who understood contracts better than most lawyers. By week 4, rumors began circulating. Who's that old lady always on the computer? She doesn't act like the others. She had visitors yesterday, important-looking ones. I didn't deny anything. I let curiosity do the work. One afternoon, Nurse Evelyn approached me with concern. Your son called. He's upset you didn't tell him about some financial documents. I looked at her gently. Did he say upset or frightened? She hesitated. Frightened. I nodded. That's new for him. That evening, my son arrived unannounced. He looked older than I remembered. Thinner, nervous. Mom, he said, closing the door behind him. Why didn't you tell us? Tell you what? I asked. He swallowed. That you still controlled things. I studied his face, the boy I raised. Now a man who let someone call his mother useless. You never asked, I said. Silence filled the room. I thought you were done, he whispered. I leaned forward. That's the mistake everyone makes. Tears welled in his eyes. Guilt. Finally doing its slow work. But guilt wasn't enough. Not yet. As he left, shaken and quiet, I returned to my notebook and wrote a single line. Phase 1 complete. They had wanted me hidden. Instead, they had given me time. And time, when combined with patience and memory, becomes something far more dangerous than anger. Outside my window, the parking lot lights flickered on. Inside me, something ancient and steady awakened. The nursing home was supposed to be the end of my story. It was only the beginning. The first sign that things were changing came quietly. No shouting, no confrontation, just hesitation. It showed up in the way my daughter-in-law started choosing her words more carefully, in how my son suddenly asked instead of told, in the subtle tension that crept into their voices whenever my name was mentioned. Fear rarely announces itself loudly. It whispers first. 2 days after my son's visit, I received an email from an old colleague, someone I hadn't spoken to in years but never truly lost touch with. I heard you're back, it read. Back, I smiled at the word. I replied simply, I never left. That afternoon, the administrator of the nursing home knocked on my door. We've had some inquiries about you, she said carefully. People asking about your background. I looked up from my book, and she shifted uncomfortably. We didn't realize you were well-connected. Well-connected is such a modern phrase. I replied, I prefer prepared. Her laugh was nervous. From that day on, things changed. Staff members became more attentive. Requests were handled faster. My schedule became flexible. Small privileges appeared without explanation, extra computer time, private meeting space, access others didn't have. Power doesn't always arrive with permission. Sometimes it's simply recognized too late. Meanwhile, in the house I once lived in, cracks were forming. My daughter-in-law called again, this time without her usual confidence. Some paperwork came up, she said. There are complications. Complications, I repeated. Yes, things tied to trusts, old clauses. Why didn't you simplify all this? I paused deliberately before answering. Because life isn't simple. Silence. We need to talk, she finally said. We already are, I replied and ended the call. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Not because I felt victorious, but because I felt seen. The next phase required patience. Public pressure works best when it feels self-inflicted. I began accepting visitors. Former students, old friends, business associates, people who remembered who I was before I became someone to manage and dismiss. They arrived dressed well, spoke respectfully, and asked my opinions. Staff noticed, residents noticed. Word spread. Soon, I wasn't that old woman in 214. I was the woman people came to see. One afternoon in the common room, I overheard a caregiver whisper, "That's her, the one whose son tried to put her away." The tone wasn't judgmental. It was curious. Curiosity is dangerous. It invites questions, and questions rarely favor those who rely on silence to control narratives. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A charity gala. My daughter-in-law had spent months organizing it, an elegant event tied to her professional image. Donors, executives, local media. The kind of night where reputations were polished carefully. One of the board members contacted me directly. "We'd be honored if you attended." She said, "Your work laid much of the foundation we're standing on." I smiled. I'd be delighted. When my daughter-in-law found out, she panicked. "You can't go," she said sharply during our next call. "Why not?" I asked calmly. "It's exhausting, too much for you." "Funny," I replied. "You said the nursing home would take care of me." She inhaled sharply. "This isn't appropriate." "Neither was calling your husband's mother useless on New Year's Eve," I said. The line went dead. At the gala, I arrived not as a forgotten relic, but as a respected guest. I wore navy blue, elegant, understated. Nurse Evelyn accompanied me, her posture proud. The room shifted when I entered. Recognition sparked across faces. Conversations paused, heads turned. People approached me first. They always do when the truth resurfaces. See, my daughter-in-law had built her identity on a curated story. Ambition, independence, modern success. And she had edited me out of it completely. She hadn't counted on memory. She hadn't counted on gratitude. As donors greeted me warmly, I noticed her across the room. Frozen mid-laugh, her smile faltered, her eyes narrowed. She walked over slowly, carefully, like someone approaching a situation she couldn't control. "You look well," she said through clenched teeth. "So do you," I replied. "Busy night." "Yes," she said, "very." "I imagine it is," I said softly, "especially when foundations resurface." Her expression stiffened. Later that evening, during a speech praising the organization's growth, the speaker paused. "There's someone here tonight," he said, "whose early work made much of this possible. A woman who taught us integrity before it was fashionable." The spotlight turned toward me. Applause followed. Not polite applause. Real applause. I stood slowly, meeting the room's gaze with quiet dignity. Across the hall, my daughter-in-law didn't clap. Her hands were locked together. That was the moment the balance shifted publicly. After the event, whispers followed her instead of praise. Questions instead of admiration. "How does she know her? Isn't that her mother-in-law?" I thought she was gone. Gone. I smiled at that word too. Because disappearing only works when you let others define your ending. The fallout didn't explode immediately. It never does. Reputations unravel thread by thread. Emails stopped returning as quickly. Invitations slowed. Meetings were postponed indefinitely. At home, tension thickened. My son called again. "She's scared," he admitted quietly. "I know," I replied. "She says you're doing this on purpose." I considered that. "No, I'm simply existing honestly." He exhaled. "What do you want, Mom?" The question landed heavier than he expected. "I want respect," I said, "and accountability." Silence followed. Then softly, I should have stopped her. "Yes," I said, "you should have." That night, my daughter-in-law sent a message, not a call. "We need to fix this." Fix. Such a convenient word. I didn't reply. Because some things can't be fixed. They can only be faced. In my room at the nursing home, I opened my notebook again. Another line. Phase 2 complete. She had tried to erase me quietly. Now, the world was remembering me loudly. And the more she struggled to control the narrative, the more it slipped from her hands. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. And when it stands, it doesn't need to raise its voice at all. Reputation doesn't collapse all at once. It fractures. Hairline cracks first, barely visible unless you're close enough to notice. Then stress builds, pressure multiplies. And one day, something small becomes too heavy to hold. My daughter-in-law was learning that lesson in real time. The morning it began unraveling, she didn't call me. She called a lawyer. Unfortunately for her, it wasn't the right one. By noon, my phone rang. "Mrs. H," the voice said warmly, "it's been a long time." I smiled. "It has. I wish the reason were better." He sighed. "I assume you've been informed." "Not yet," I replied, "but I'm listening." He explained carefully. A review request. Asset questions. Concerns about authority over trusts. A sudden interest in documents that hadn't mattered for years. Until now. "Your daughter-in-law is asking questions she doesn't have standing to ask," his tone implied. I thanked him and hung up. Across town, panic was setting in. She had always believed power was something you took, and people simply accepted. She never considered that power could be conditional, or worse, revocable. That afternoon, she arrived at the nursing home without warning. No heels this time. No polished confidence. She stood in my doorway, eyes sharp with desperation. "We need to talk," she said. I didn't invite her in immediately. That pause mattered. Finally, I gestured to the chair. "Sit." She didn't. I'm serious, she said. This has gone far enough. I looked at her steadily. You decided what far enough meant on New Year's Eve, remember? Her jaw tightened. People are asking questions. She snapped, about you, about us. About you, I corrected gently. Silence. You embarrassed me, she said. I tilted my head. No, I existed. That landed harder than anger ever could. She stepped closer. What do you want? The same question again. I want the truth acknowledged. I said, and I want control returned to where it belongs. Control, she scoffed. You're living in a nursing home. I smiled faintly, and yet here you are. She froze. That was the moment realization finally reached her eyes. This wasn't revenge fueled by rage. This was structure, planning, consequence. You think you're clever, she said quietly, but you're alone. I stood. Slowly. No, I said. I was alone, there's a difference. I walked to the dresser and opened the drawer. Inside lay copies, organized, labeled, undeniable. Trust documents, property records, legal authority she had never possessed. I gave my son access, I continued. Not ownership, I allowed you comfort, not command. Her breathing quickened. You can't take everything away, she whispered. I'm not taking anything, I replied. I'm reclaiming what was never yours. She left without another word. That night my son came. He didn't knock. He stood in the doorway, shoulders slumped, eyes tired in a way I hadn't seen since his father died. She's unraveling, he said. I know. She thinks you're trying to destroy her. I considered him carefully. Do you? He didn't answer immediately. That hesitation told me everything. I failed you, he finally said. I let her speak for me. Yes, I replied. You did. He flinched but didn't argue. What happens now? He asked. That depends on you, I said. I didn't threaten him. I didn't plead. I offered him choice. Choice is heavier than blame. Days passed. Then weeks. Emails circulated. Audits were announced. Board members resigned quietly. Invitations stopped arriving at her inbox. At home, arguments replaced strategy. She grew sharper, louder, desperate. People like her don't fear loss at first. They fear exposure. The final crack came during a meeting she assumed would be routine. Instead, it became a reckoning. Questions she couldn't deflect. Documents she couldn't explain. A past she couldn't rewrite. She walked out early. And for the first time, no one followed. That evening, my son called. His voice broke halfway through the sentence. She said you planned this all along. I closed my eyes. No, I planned to survive. Silence. She wants me to choose, he said. I already did, I replied softly. Years ago, when I raised you to know right from wrong. He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, I'm coming tomorrow. When he arrived, he brought something unexpected. Apology. Not excuses. Not explanations. Just truth. I was afraid of conflict, he said. I thought keeping the peace mattered more than protecting you. I nodded. That's a common mistake. I told her she owes you an apology. And, I asked. She refused. I smiled, not with triumph but clarity. Then this ends exactly as it should. He looked at me. What about you? I won't stay where I'm merely tolerated. I said, I will stay where I'm respected. The next morning, arrangements were made. Not hurried, not emotional, intentional. I wasn't leaving the nursing home in shame. I was leaving on my terms. As I packed my small suitcase, Nurse Evelyn hugged me tightly. You changed this place, she said. No, I replied. I reminded myself who I was. Outside, the sun was bright. My son opened the car door for me. Behind us, a woman stood watching from a distance, arms crossed, face tight, control slipping. She didn't wave. Neither did I. Because this wasn't about winning. It was about reclaiming dignity from someone who thought age meant surrender. As we drove away, my phone buzzed. A message. We need to talk. I didn't open it. Some conversations arrive too late, and some lessons can't be softened. They must be lived. The house felt different when I returned, not because the walls had changed, or the furniture had been rearranged, but because power had. Silence greeted me as I stepped inside, the kind of silence that no longer belongs to someone waiting to be tolerated, but to someone whose presence reshapes the room. My son carried my suitcase upstairs, slowly, carefully, like every step mattered now. She's not here, he said. She went to stay with a friend. I nodded. That made sense. People who lose control often run before they face consequences. I chose the small bedroom at the end of the hall. Not the master, not the guest room I once slept in. This one felt right. That first night, I slept deeply. No brochures, no locked doors. No one deciding where I belonged. Just space. Morning came with a knock. My son stood there, coffee in hand. Nervous again, but this time not weak. I spoke to the lawyer, he said. Everything's clear now. Good, I replied. She's angry, he continued. She says you turned everyone against her. I took the cup from his hand. Did I? He hesitated, then shook his head. No, she did that herself. That was the moment I knew. He had crossed the line, he'd avoided his entire life. The day unfolded quietly, but tension simmered beneath every hour. By evening, she returned. I heard the door slam before I saw her. She stormed into the living room, eyes blazing, not with confidence, but with something far uglier. Betrayal. You planned this, she said, pointing at me. You waited, you watched. I remained seated. I survived, I replied. That's not the same thing. She laughed bitterly. You ruined my life. No, I said calmly. I removed myself from your control. She turned to my son. Are you just going to let her do this? He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was steady. She didn't do anything, he said. You did. The room froze. That sentence, so simple, so late, cut deeper than any argument ever could. Her eyes widened. Excuse me. You humiliated my mother, he continued. You spoke for me, you decided without asking. And when consequences came, you blamed everyone but yourself. She shook her head, incredulous. After everything I built, you built on someone else's foundation. He interrupted, and then tried to erase her. Silence crashed down. She looked at me again, really looked this time. Not as an obstacle, not as a burden, but as the source of everything she had underestimated. You think this ends well for you? She asked me quietly. I met her gaze. It already has. Her shoulders dropped slightly. That was new. Pack your things, my son said. Her breath caught. You can't be serious. I am, he replied. I need time, and so does this family. She searched his face, waiting for doubt. It didn't come. She turned to me one last time. You took my place, she said bitterly. No, I replied. You gave it away. She left with 2 suitcases and no goodbye. The door closed behind her, not dramatically, not loudly. Final. That night, my son sat across from me at the kitchen table. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, but I want to earn back respect. I studied him. Respect, I said, comes from action, not intention. He nodded, then I'll start there. In the weeks that followed, the world corrected itself. Not kindly, honestly. Her name faded from boards. Her calls went unanswered. The image she curated collapsed under scrutiny. She could no longer outrun. Meanwhile, I rebuilt quietly. I donated, not money but mentorship. Time, guidance. I returned to places that valued wisdom over noise. People listened, not because I demanded it, but because I no longer begged to be heard. One afternoon, I received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Inside, a single sentence. I didn't know how much you mattered until you were gone. I folded the paper and placed it in my notebook. Not as victory, as closure. On the next New Year's Eve, exactly 1 year later, my son and I sat together. No countdown clock. No performance. Just tea and honesty. I was wrong, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. And you were never useless. I smiled, not because he said it, but because I never needed him to. Outside, fireworks lit the sky. Inside, I felt no need to prove anything. They once tried to send me away because they thought my value had expired. They were wrong. Value doesn't disappear with age. It reveals itself when tested. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to disappear. Time doesn't heal everything, but it reveals everything. In the months that followed her departure, the house learned a new rhythm, one that didn't revolve around control, tension, or quiet fear. It wasn't joyful at first. It was honest, and honesty takes time to settle. My son changed in ways that weren't loud. He stopped rushing through conversations. He started listening without preparing excuses. He asked questions and waited for answers. That mattered more than apologies. Meanwhile, the world outside continued correcting itself. Her downfall didn't arrive with headlines or scandal. It arrived the way truth usually does, through distance. Invitations that never came. Calls returned late or not at all. Rooms that once opened for her now closed politely. Power doesn't vanish dramatically. It evaporates when people stop believing in it. She tried to rebuild, new circles, new narratives, but stories collapse when too many people know the original version. And they did. Not because I told them, but because integrity leaves a trail. One afternoon, I received an unexpected visit. She stood at the door, not angry, not sharp. Just tired. I won't stay long, she said. I stepped aside. You never did. She sat stiffly, hands folded. No accusations this time. No rehearsed confidence. They don't return my calls, she said quietly. People I helped. I poured tea. Help is different from leverage. She flinched. I didn't come to argue, she said. I came to understand. I met her eyes. That's new. She nodded slowly. I thought usefulness meant productivity, output, control. And now, I asked. She swallowed. Now I see it also means presence. Silence stretched between us, not hostile, not warm. Necessary. I won't ask forgiveness, she said finally. I know I don't deserve it. That's true, I replied. She exhaled, relieved by the honesty. But you may earn something else, I continued. She looked up. Understanding, I said, if you choose to learn instead of defend. Her eyes filled, not with tears but recognition. I don't know how, she admitted. That, I said gently, is where everyone starts. She left without closure. And that was enough. Legacy doesn't require reconciliation. It requires clarity. As for me, I didn't reclaim my place in the family. I redefined it. I became someone consulted, not managed. Someone respected, not tolerated. My son learned to stand without borrowing someone else's voice. And I learned something too. That dignity isn't restored by revenge, but by refusal. Refusal to disappear. Refusal to shrink. Refusal to accept a definition written by someone who never bothered to read your history. On the second New Year's Eve after that night, the one where everything began, I stood alone by the window. No countdown. No audience. Just reflection. They had once said I was useless. What they meant was, I no longer served them. And that misunderstanding cost them everything. Because usefulness isn't about service. It's about impact. And impact doesn't fade with age, it deepens. The fireworks bloomed across the sky. I didn't wish for anything. I had already reclaimed what mattered. There comes a point in life when ambition grows quiet. Not because it dies, but because it transforms. I reached that point the year I turned 78. People often assume legacy is something loud. Buildings with names carved into stone. Foundations, endowments, grand gestures meant to outlive the body. They're wrong. Legacy is quieter. It lives in the way people speak your name when you're not in the room. It lives in what changes after you refuse to be erased. My life settled into a deliberate calm. Not the calm of retreat, but the calm of authority. I chose where my energy went, who deserved my attention, which battles were finished. I began teaching again. Not formally, no classrooms, no titles. Just a small group, young professionals, caregivers, a few women who had been told their relevance expired the moment they became inconvenient. They came with notebooks. They left with something better. Perspective. One afternoon, one of them asked, "How did you survive being discarded?" I didn't answer immediately. By understanding this, I finally said, "People don't discard you because you're weak. They discard you because you remind them of accountability." That truth settled heavily in the room. Meanwhile, my son grew into himself. He stopped apologizing publicly and started correcting privately. He learned that love without courage is abandonment disguised as peace. We spoke often, not as parent and child, but as equals shaped by consequence. I didn't know how afraid I was, he admitted once. Fear isn't failure, I told him. Avoiding it is. As for her, she didn't disappear. She changed. And change is harder than disappearance. She found work again, smaller roles. Less power, more listening. The world humbled her not through cruelty, but irrelevance. That is the most honest teacher of all. Occasionally, our paths crossed. Brief nods, neutral space. No resentment, just memory. I didn't need her apology to validate my worth. That chapter had already closed. The final piece of my legacy came quietly, through a letter I wrote, sealed and placed with my documents. Not a will, a record. It outlined decisions, yes, but also reasons, context, truth. Because inheritance, without understanding, creates entitlement. And I refused to pass that forward. On the last page, I wrote, "Never measure usefulness by convenience. Measure it by courage." When the time came, years later, I wasn't afraid. I had already outlived the version of myself they tried to bury. The world remembered me not as someone discarded, but as someone who refused to vanish politely. And that, more than anything else, became the story that survived. By now, the whispers had become a current. The world that once ignored me, dismissed me, silenced me, could no longer do so. They were too late. I had already built a presence that wasn't granted by age, wealth, or connection. It was earned through survival, strategy, and quiet persistence. The first signal came unexpectedly. A journalist reached out, not for scandal, not for drama, but for truth. "Mrs. H," she said during our call, "people are curious about how someone like you navigates power and invisibility. Curiosity, the weapon that always precedes understanding." I agreed to speak. Not for revenge, not for validation, but for record. The interview ran in a widely circulated magazine. Headlines praised intelligence, patience, resilience. The story framed me not as a victim, but as an architect of my own dignity. For the first time, the world heard my version. Responses poured in. Letters, emails, messages from people who had been silenced, ignored, or discarded. They share their gratitude, their stories, their realization that usefulness is not defined by others. It is defined by presence, courage, and boundaries. Even my daughter-in-law could not ignore it. She called me once, short, hesitant, words halting. I read it," she admitted. "Good," I said. "Did it make sense?" "Yes," she whispered. "I see now." No apology followed. None was expected. Understanding, however, was far more powerful than contrition. Then came legal clarity. The trusts, the properties, the assets that had been manipulated behind the veil of convenience, all reaffirmed. Lawyers, accountants, and boards acknowledged my rightful ownership and authority. She had tried to rewrite history. The law reminded her it doesn't bend for convenience, it honors truth. Across the city, conversations changed. Where I had once been quietly tolerated, I was now consulted. Where I had once been invisible, I was now noticed, not for drama, not for revenge, but for the undeniable fact that I mattered. One afternoon, my son joined me in the study. "They're finally admitting it," he said, eyes wide. "Not everyone, but enough." I nodded. Not everyone matters, those who do already know. We sat in silence, the weight of the journey, the years of subtle power, finally tangible in quiet acknowledgement. Later that evening, a social media post from an acquaintance appeared, a photograph from the gala months ago, captioned, "This woman doesn't just survive. She redefines what survival looks like." Likes, shares, comments. People began sharing their own stories of reclaiming space, demanding respect, refusing erasure. It became a movement of subtle reckoning. The woman who had tried to erase me was forced into invisibility, not by me, but by truth. She could not control what the world now understood. I smiled quietly to myself. Sometimes, the strongest victories don't require force. They require patience, awareness, precision. By the end of the month, the world had witnessed not my anger, but my steadfast presence, not my revenge, but my dignity. And through it all, the most important acknowledgement remained private. My son had learned courage. My daughter-in-law had learned humility. And I had learned, once again, that the world does not determine your worth. You do. By now, the world had acknowledged me. But acknowledgement doesn't heal everything. It doesn't mend hearts. It doesn't erase betrayal. It simply gives clarity. The house had grown quieter, not empty, not tense, just honest. And that honesty created space, a rare, fragile, and valuable space. My daughter-in-law returned once more. This time, she didn't storm. She hesitated in the doorway. Her eyes searched mine, perhaps for judgment, perhaps for mercy. I want to understand," she said softly. I studied her carefully. Understanding is different from apology. It carries weight. It doesn't erase the past. It only allows the present to move forward. "Do you?" I asked. "Yes," she admitted. I nodded, not with relief, not with joy, but with recognition. The choice was mine. Forgiveness or freedom. Forgiveness can heal some things, but it can also bind you to what has hurt you. Freedom allows peace without condoning mistakes. I chose freedom. "Then start there," I said gently. "Learn without expectation." Her eyes filled, not with tears, not with remorse, but with understanding of boundaries she had once ignored. And that was enough. My son stood beside her quietly. He had learned the weight of silence, the courage of truth, and the responsibility of action. "You were wrong," he said to her softly. "Not because of love, but because of fear and convenience." She nodded. No words could undo what had been done. No apology could erase the humiliation. But recognition, the simple act of facing truth, was its own resolution. Later that day, I sat in my study, notebook open. I wrote carefully, thoughtfully, each word deliberate. Forgiveness is a gift, but freedom is a choice. I choose the latter. It was more than a sentence. It was a declaration. It was a conclusion. In the weeks that followed, peace settled, not as complacency, not as passivity, but as certainty. I no longer felt tension when my daughter-in-law entered a room. I no longer worried about whispered comments or covert actions. I no longer needed anyone's permission to exist fully. Life, I realized, had a rhythm. Power ebbs, control shifts, people falter, but integrity remains. And dignity, true dignity, remains untouched by opinion or circumstance. I spent those days teaching, mentoring, sharing, and quietly observing the world around me. People came to me, not to take, but to learn. They left changed, stronger, wiser. And I learned too. That closure is not found in vengeance. It is found in understanding, in boundaries, in choosing peace over lingering bitterness. On the next New Year's Eve, exactly 2 years after the night that began everything, I stood at the window. The city glittered beneath me. Fireworks exploded in rhythm with the heartbeat of the world. I didn't need to count down. I didn't need to celebrate externally. I had already won. Not through retaliation, not through dominance, through patience, awareness, courage, and choice. I whispered softly, I am here, I am enough, I am free. That night, the world could do nothing to erase me. Not then, not ever. And I slept peacefully. The night was quiet, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of finality. I walked through the rooms of the house, my house, reclaimed not through conflict, but by presence. Each step echoed softly against polished floors, a reminder of years lived fully, fought wisely, and survived deliberately. The world had tried to define me. They called me useless, invisible, a relic. They thought my voice no longer mattered. They assumed my presence could be ignored. They were wrong. Outside, the city shimmered. Lights reflected in windows like scattered promises, each one a reminder that life continues, regardless of fear or doubt. I stopped at the window that overlooked the street, where my daughter-in-law once believed she held control. Cars moved, people laughed, a faint fireworks display in the distance. Life was indifferent, but truth was not. The door creaked behind me. My son entered, quietly, carrying nothing but respect and the awareness of what had been learned. Are you ready? He asked. I turned to him. I have always been ready. He nodded, not for me, not for validation, but because he now understood. Strength is not inherited, it is realized. The final lesson, however, wasn't for him. It was for me. I walked to my study and opened my leather notebook. Pages filled with decades of life's battles, victories, regrets, and lessons. Each word a testament that being dismissed, underestimated, or silenced does not erase your value. I wrote one last entry. Some try to erase you, some try to diminish your worth. But the world does not determine value. Presence does, courage does, and refusing to disappear is the greatest declaration of all. I closed the notebook. A knock at the door reminded me that life continues. Ever insistent, I opened it to see Nurse Evelyn smiling softly, carrying a cup of tea. You've changed more than anyone imagined, she said. I smiled, not changed, remembered. Remembered what it means to be alive. Remembered that dignity cannot be bargained away. Remembered that age, time, or fear never diminishes purpose. Outside, fireworks erupted, loud, bright, unstoppable, life celebrating life. And in that moment, I understood, victory is not loud. It does not always roar. Sometimes it simply exists, solid, undeniable, eternal. I turned from the window, walked to the kitchen, and poured tea. The warmth spread through my hands, the aroma filling the room, grounding me in the knowledge that I had reclaimed everything that mattered. My voice, my dignity, my freedom, my life. And finally, I whispered softly, not to anyone but to the universe itself. I refuse to disappear, and that is enough. The world may try, people may doubt, time may press, but no one, not even those who once called me useless, can erase what refuses to be erased. That night I slept fully, not in fear, not in hesitation, not in waiting, but in the full certainty of my own worth. And that certainty, quiet yet unbreakable, became my final, unshakable legacy.